Really quickly, before we get started, wanted to set the stage so you all have some context. First of all, good morning. My name is Peter, and I'm a senior associate here at 500. My job is largely to work with a number of corporate investors and innovators on projects related to startup investment and startup partnerships. And so this event is being hosted as part of our ongoing Slack community called 500 VC. 500 VC is an invite-only community for corporate and institutional investors to engage in helpful conversation, networking, and ultimately empowering founders. And so while we host networking events, startup presentations, and discussion series like this one, this is one of our bi-weekly kind of cornerstone events where we interview specifically CVCs and we hear about their best practices and their learnings. And so within the Slack group, we actually started the Corporate Venturing channel to be a collaborative community through which members can share best practices and learnings, as well as enhance the perception of CVC among the startup ecosystem. So if you're at all interested in joining and you're not already a part of the Slack community, feel free to drop me a message. You can either message in the chat or you can email me or Sean directly. I'll drop our emails in the chat in a second. And so once again, this event is a bi-weekly speaker series featuring top corporate venturing practitioners sharing their unique journey to CVC, specific challenges, and the best practices they've developed as a result. And so I'm gonna leave it to our host, Nicola, to introduce our guest for today in a second. But first, a couple quick housekeeping items. Number one, throughout the event, we may be launching some polls so we can better understand who's in the audience and share more relevant thoughts as we go. And then secondly, we have Q&A on. So at any point, if you have a question to any of the speakers or the panelists, please feel free to go ahead and ask, and then we'll try to get to that at the end when we do a more open Q&A style format. So now that you know what's going on, I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to Nicola to kick things off. Enjoy.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you 500 Startup to set this up for us. This is a really important a series of interviews, which is really about understanding corporate venturing better. And it's not just about CVCs, but many, many different ways of helping entrepreneurs and their projects to be successful, which we kind of put it into this very big category of corporate venturing. Now, today is really, really cool because this is really not a corporate VC like you would imagine, but this is going to be something from a name you know, I think, called NASA. And they clearly have different constraints in terms of how to engage with entrepreneurs, but it's actually extremely, extremely important they do it well. And so I will be asking questions to Jen Gustetic. But before that, she will have 10 minutes to introduce herself, a program, and what she's done so far. And you will see it's pretty amazing. Jen, all yours.
Thank you, Nicola, very much. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon to folks all over that are joining us. Just want to thank Nicola and the 500 Startups team for convening this series of discussions. I really enjoyed the first with Jason, who's also part of the VC Unlock training where I met Nicola back last year. So excited to be here today to share a little bit with you all about how we think about investing in technology companies at NASA and how that interplays with the broader corporate venturing ecosystem, and have a robust discussion with Nicola. So if we go to the next slide, I'll tell you just a little bit about me. I have been at NASA for almost 10 years in a few different roles. I started off as the first Prizes and Challenges program executive for NASA, founded the Asteroid Grand Challenge to find all asteroid threats to human populations and know what to do about them. So I started off as an asteroid hunter, which was pretty fun at NASA, putting all of our prizes, crowdsourcing, and public engagement tools to bear on that particular problem. And did a tour of duty at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy as well for a couple years, working on scaling those innovative approaches to involving more people in innovative solutions across the country, scaling that across the whole federal government. And came back to NASA in 2016 to run our SBIR program. And I'll explain a little bit more what that acronym means and why it's relevant to this discussion of corporate venturing. But I am someone that is incredibly passionate about technology, public-private partnerships, and working across sectors and disciplines in order to find new ways to approach old problems that have public value. So if we go to the next slide. I'm going to start, and this is the slide I'm going to spend the most time on, just to give you guys a high-level view of what the heck this acronym means. So you see SBIR and STTR at the top of the slide. That is a NASA program that is actually older than I am, only by a few months, but older than I am, called the Small Business Innovation Research Program at NASA, and then the Small Business Technology Transfer Program at NASA. And these two programs are tasked with furthering research and technology development and building capabilities for NASA, the aerospace industry as a whole, and frankly, the broader nation, the broader United States. What we do is we partner with small businesses, and we consider those to be firms that are less than 500 employees, but dramatically the dramatic majority of the amount of investments that we make are much smaller size companies, less than 25 employees. In the STTR portion of the program, we not only invest in small businesses and entrepreneurs, but through STTR, we try to encourage university partnerships. And so that's an important program for actually spinning out innovations from the lab and from scientific advancements and research advancements in the lab into the marketplace through these small business partnerships. And we deploy annually, every year, around $200 million of capital annually. So it's a lot of money that we spend every year through small businesses, entrepreneurs, and research institutions. And we literally fund technology related to everything NASA does. So NASA obviously does human exploration work and does a significant amount of science work and space technology development. But many people don't also realize that there's a second A in NASA, and that second A is for aeronautics. So we also invest significantly in aeronautics related technologies. And our goal is really to introduce new technologies when and where they're needed most in this broader aerospace and aeronautics ecosystem. To find these technologies, we've invested in firms in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. We specifically only invest in US companies. That's important probably for the audience of this series to know. And we do so throughout the year. For example, this summer, just last month, we announced our 2020 phase one selections, which you can see from this funnel is the first investment we make. It's a $125K check where we expect the work to be conducted in roughly 6 months for an SBIR and 13 months for an STTR. We give them longer for STTRs because of that university relationship, and universities can move a bit slower than the pace of small businesses and entrepreneurs. But we made $51 million in awards this summer to over 300 companies through over 400 investments. So we invest in volume, significant volume through this program. I also want to note, importantly, that NASA is not the only US federal agency that has an SBIR program, and this is really important. The US federal government overall invests over $3 billion, that's a B, $3 billion every year through SBIR and STTR programs at 10 different agencies. So NASA is one of those, and we are one of the bigger programs because we invest around $200 million. But the Department of Defense and National Institutes of Health are actually the biggest SBIR investors. They invest upwards of $1 billion, close to $1 billion a year through these programs. So just because we don't fund it at NASA doesn't mean that there's not some other SBIR program in some other part of the government that does fund that technology. So I want to talk you a little bit through the phase information you see on the screen right now, because this kind of gets at how we handle our portfolio and down selecting firms and then determining who we're going to actually give follow-on funding to. There are some basic requirements by law. Since we are a government program, we are actually mandated to be a 3-phase program. By law, we have a phase 1, which is what we consider the idea phase, where we're investing in those 125K initial investments. And phase 2, the only people that can compete for phase 2 are people that have been selected for a phase 1. At phase 2, we tend to focus on the development, demonstration, and delivery of the particular innovation. And those investments are $750,000 for a 2-month or a 2-year period of performance, excuse me. And ultimately, the goal of our program is to try to help as many of those firms as possible to get to phase 3. Well, what is phase 3? Phase 3 means they no longer need our money because other customers are buying from them. And so phase 3 is technically money that comes from programs other than mine. But frankly, getting to phase 3 is tough, as you all understand very, very well. And phase 1 and phase 2 awards alone are not enough to support a company's journey to commercialization. So our program has actually created additional opportunities to help firms get there. You see those at the bottom of the slide. They're called post-phase 2 opportunities. And we provide more than just funding at this point. There are some significant funding opportunities. You see below that actually just in FY20 this year, we have $45 million in planned investments. They're usually larger dollar value awards to much smaller number of companies. And a couple of these different post-phase 2 opportunities, the first and the last, the phase 2E and the CCRPP, those actually are a dollar for dollar match program. So that's our way to incentivize customers and investors to come to the table with additional funding for firms, companies, and technologies they're interested in. And the SBIR program will match dollar for dollar investor capital under the rules of those particular programs. But we offer more than funding. We also offer entrepreneurial training programs like the I-Corps program that was inspired by Lean Launchpad methodology out of Stanford, Steve Blank, and a number of other types of resources as well. Next slide. So I just want to give you guys a sense of the impact of our program and why it is an important role for NASA to invest in de-risking technologies for industries of the future. You'll see here a quote from one of my colleagues, Chris Baker, who runs NASA's Small Spacecraft Technologies program. And the SBIR program has been investing in component level innovations and application level innovations for small spacecraft for some time. And we, in many ways, those early investments of de-risking the technology and taking a chance on something that seemed a little risky from multiple angles at that time, has actually enabled the creation of a number of entrepreneurial small firms that have built an entirely new industry around small spacecraft capabilities. So there is a role for the SBIR program in helping to seed and pave the way for industries of the future by making those risky technology investment bets that may be a little bit too early stage for other types of investors. Next slide. We also, since SBIR has been around so long, we've done lots of impact studies to understand what the impact of this dollar spend is on our broader economy, because that frankly is one of the important roles for the SBIR program, is to stimulate innovation and job growth in the US. And it is unique in that way, this annual set aside that is available every year reliably from the US government in order to support innovation in small businesses and entrepreneurs. In fact, we find that for every dollar invested by SBIR, over $2 were ultimately invested to the US economy, and over a 10-year period, that investment sees a 19-to-1 return in the economy. And so that's why Congress continues to support this program, because dollar for dollar, it's getting a great long-term impact for the overall economy. Next slide. And so this is just a different way of teasing out, I think, one of the concepts that I've kind of already alluded to. Actually, was there a seed fund or both? Yeah, here we go. In the SBIR program, we have a dual mandate. We are both an R&D program where we support cool technology that we think is really important for the future and de-risking that technology, where NASA is a potential customer. But we also see ourselves and see the increasing interest from Congress and other stakeholders for us to function more like what I would actually call a pre-seed fund, where we're also investing in disruptive capabilities and the potential industries of the future, and not only technologies that could potentially be of transformative interest to a single NASA customer. I like to say at NASA, we're oftentimes a market of 5. We'll buy one to break, one to bake, one to shake, one to put on the shelf, and one to fly. We're not a huge market at NASA. And so if you are a small business trying to address a larger market, you have to think beyond NASA as a customer. We're a really, really good initial customer to push the boundaries of your technology, to get you great technical expertise as we work with you on the development of your contract, to get access to testing facilities and really push the limits on what your technology is able to do. And we can be your first anchor customer, but we're not going to get you that exponential growth alone because we're just not that big enough. We're just not big enough of a market. So we do encourage our companies to think beyond us as a market for their transformative technologies, because investing in things from autonomy to robotics to mining technologies to earth science data applications to quantum, we invest in things that have applications well beyond NASA that could be of interest to a number of different strategic investors at CVCs, but also have broader marketplace applications. And I'm just going to make a couple more comments and then I'll turn it over to Nicolas for discussion. If we go to the next slide, we really see, if you're trying to think about differentiating us, for example, why would someone come to us for funding? Why would someone go through the horrible process of applying for a government contract or grant when they could go through, having a couple coffees and a couple pitches and diligence with an investor? Well, we play a different role in the ecosystem. We do fund riskier technologies than folks might be able to find other deep tech investors that are actually willing to invest. That's number one. But also, it's not just the money. When you go for a NASA or a government SBIR contract, you get access to all sorts of other advantages. And that's not just even association with the NASA brand, which can be hugely valuable in and of itself to show that NASA validated and gave credibility to your idea and to your technology, which can help actually in follow-on funding. But also that we don't take any equity. We actually are seen more as revenue from the vantage point of an investor because we're contracts. We execute through contracts. So we're seen as revenue on a company's kind of pitch to you downstream. Next slide. And we see that we have increasingly been more ambitious in what role we think that we play in the broader ecosystem. We know that we'll always be playing a role in maturing transformative capabilities, funding early stage innovations and helping them transition in their development journey and their commercialization journey. But that road to payoff can be 20 years. Some firms that have recently been acquired by that started working through NASA SBIR, or they're 22, 23-year-old firms, but they were developing capabilities, for example, related to autonomy, like Aurora Flight Systems, that caused Boeing to acquire them as a core part of their autonomy arm. But that's 22 years of investments in people, in patents, in technology, and in customers in order to get that kind of valuation. So 20 years, that's long. That's a long time. And so we also recognize the role that we can play in the SBIR program to accelerate and take a higher velocity and speed towards helping to take some of those things that have a much clearer customer path to do that additional fast and higher dollar value investment really aligned with the customer to help drive similar results faster. So we've been experimenting more with this kind of acceleration function. And recently just announced 4 investments that we made that were $5 million investments each for development of technologies that are critically important to NASA's return to the moon with a direct customer path right after that through the development of that additional contract. So the final slide is just, I believe, how to find out more information about us. So sbir.nasa.gov, you can find a lot of information from a company perspective. There's everything that you need to know on there about how to apply, when the upcoming application windows are, but also from an investor standpoint. A way to think about the SBIR program is not only as a potential source of deal flow, but also as dollar for dollar leverage on your investments. Paying attention to those post-phase 2 matching opportunities, which you can see in that first bullet, the post-phase 2 initiatives, understanding the rules of how to double your investment through a NASA SBIR phase 2E or CCRPP can just get you additional leverage if that's something that's of interest to you. But also something I encourage folks to do is really search, get familiar with the technologies and the firms that are in our portfolio from a a potential deal, especially from a CVC perspective, from a potential strategic investment deal flow perspective. So with that being said, I think I went maybe just a couple minutes over my 10-minute promise, but got through a lot. So hopefully folks have a high level understanding of what NASA's SBIR program is, the amount of money we spend, how we spend it, who we spend it on, and how we see ourselves fitting in with a broader ecosystem that ultimately is required to engage with in order to have the commercialization and job creation and value creation impacts that we want to have.
Thank you, Jen. It was really, really good. What I like the most about what you said is it's not just for NASA, and it's not just good for the country, but you're really thinking about the companies, the entrepreneur. You want to be a good anchor customer. You want to make sure that they succeed beyond NASA. And I think that's a very good way of framing all the questions we will be asking afterwards, because you're really looking at how do you make sure that a company that has a very risky technology, it may be a non-proven market, probably very much so. How do they get a chance to get started, proven, get a good anchor customer? And I'm sure NASA opened doors to many other customers, and then grow from there. So, and I like the fact you just termed a new term for us, pre-seed fund.
Pre, so, yeah. I mean, Lord, we're at no lack of names of various types of stages, right? So why not just invent a new one?
Why not? So, but to me, that implies that you would be the first check many times in these companies. Do you have a feel for how many times you were the first check in the company versus the time where you already have some kind of seed money?
Yeah, so I can give a lot of what we do is a combination of qualitative and quantitative. So there's a lot of storytelling, just the same as in your world, where one story, for example, is we were the first check for a company called Made in Space, just under, I think it was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And they were just acquired last month by Redwire. And prior to that had gotten an over $100 million contract with NASA to additively construct beams in space. So kind of leading the additive construction revolution in space, where you don't have to launch as much prefabbed mass, which can take up a lot of volume in a rocket, and rockets are primarily what drive the cost to get things to space. So the ability to actually manufacture things in space and just send up the feedstock is hugely transformative for unlocking a LEO economy and a whole new kind of off-planet set of economic activities. So that for that particular instance, the first thing they wanted to do was build a 3D printer on the International Space Station, figure out how to 3D print in microgravity. Like, how do you even do that if gravity's not extruding it's just totally different technology. And that's the first thing that we invested in, and they were just recently acquired.
Excellent. Okay, this is a great success story. At one point in your slides, and I see the audience is asking the same question, you mentioned non-invasive. And to me, it sounded like more like non-dilutive investment. Is it grants or is it equity investments?
That's a great question. So we execute through contracts. So there are other agencies. So this is one of the key, I'm glad that question was asked. Of the 10 programs across the US federal government, I'd say about half of us make the awards through contracts with the federal government, which is why you all might see it more as revenue, because it's contract deliverables and terms and all of that. The other half, people like the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health, Department of Energy, they actually make their awards through grants, not through contracts. And what's the difference and why does it matter? If a government agency is making the award through a contract, they're signaling that they are likely a customer of that technology. And they're trying to almost like help that company through baby steps figure out how to work with the government as a customer. Because when you work with the government as a customer, you're working on a contract. And those are non-trivial mechanisms to figure out your accounting systems, all of that, if you feel like the government is actually one of the marketplaces you want to go after, right? For some government agencies, like I said, Energy, National Science Foundation, they are never going to be a customer. They are research and development agencies. So what they fund, they fund public good, where they know that they're not, so they don't have as much direction over the direction of the research because they're not a customer. So NSF actually, interestingly, has taken that their role in the overall SBIR ecosystem to heart and completely reframed themselves. They actually, NSF, always want to be the first check through the SBIR program. They have in fact changed kind of the focus of how they even recruit companies and how they evaluate companies to put more of an emphasis on the kind of willingness to learn and the ability to pivot and like the actual founding team. They're more like, NSF is more like a early stage investor in the way they look at firms. Technology is important. It has to have some innovative technology element, not just like, you know, the next version of this, you know, not the fourth version of the fourth business model of the same thing that's already been tried, but it has to have some innovative technology at its core. But they tend to value the team dynamics a lot more than, say, NASA, who does primarily look at the technology. And that's where our strength is, right? We're mostly engineers, scientists, technologists. We should not be evaluating a company's business plan or commercialization plan. That's not our strength. So in fact, when we do get to the part of the process where that becomes more important, we actually have an external panel that we bring on of commercialization and business expertise that give us their take on the kind of the commercialization plans of the proposals of the firms. Because that's a very difficult thing for an engineer, scientist, or a technologist to do. They just love the cool technology and how cool the idea would be if it worked.
Yeah. I think you're right. It's a very strong positive signal to know this is going to be contracts. Mm-hmm. And here, I like the purity of it because I think many corporate VCs are not necessarily very pure. Sometimes they do equity investments and sometimes they do equity investments linked with a contract. Mm-hmm. And I don't actually like when it's combined because it feels like you're saying, oh, I trust you, but at the same time, I want you to do what I think you should be doing. And I feel like when you link the two, this is not very pure. In your case, you'll go very pure on the contract side, which is, this is a signal NASA believe if you were to deliver on this technology, there is a path where NASA could be your customer and an anchor customer and all of that. So I like this purity, and I think it's indeed a very nice signal because it shows you believe in the technology if it can be delivered.
Yeah, now, and that is the, you know, really the place in the overall NASA portfolio when you look at, because NASA invests in technology. That's what we invest a lot in technology. We're not, my program is not the only place that invests in technology. But if you think about the overall portfolio of investments, where should you be taking the most risk in what you invest in? Probably with the small businesses that are the most entrepreneurial in their mindset, have the able to move rapidly and try new things and aren't kind of baked into the established way that the large primes think about innovation. And it's small investments and they're quick. And so there is a decently high failure rate on the technologies like themselves. Oh, this approach to that technology didn't work, or this part of it worked, but now we need to perfect this part of it in order to get to that. It allows for that, some of that iteration and experimentation. And some of the bigger firms that still work with us that are small, but small, they end up working with us through kind of more of an IRAD, an internal research and development type of way, to say we might be bigger, but we still need to invest in technologies and capabilities of the future. And so this is like the seed fund that some of those firms use to continue to make sure that they're at the cutting edge of the capabilities and the service offerings that they're offering to their customers. And it's those folks that are the ones that we see consistently getting acquired when they kind of reach that stage of value of IP, of people, of customers, of all of that. And they're usually pre-market, right? They're usually very pre-market. The stuff that we invest in, it's very transformative, but the markets haven't put their head around yet how to apply it for growth. And so then when those business models do present themselves, we have a lot of technology capabilities in firms that can be positioned into that, but sometimes need some hand-holding, right, to figure out how to do that.
I'm going to be cheeky, but you invest in rocket science.
And more.
And more. So there is a good question from the audience I'm going to read out, but I'm going to frame it with a provocative statement. And it's provocative, but I'm a geek myself, so I want to be clear. I love technology, I'm passionate about it. So it feels like because you're so pre-seed fund stage, it's geek investing in geeks. And so one of my questions is going to be about how do you make these investment decisions? Would you invest? What kind of investment committee do you have? And it leads to the question from the audience, which is what level of maturity is necessary for your pre-seed investment from NASA to happen?
Yeah, so this is one of those parts when you talked about at the very beginning, Nicolas, some of the constraints that you end up being under as a government program. Before I agreed to take the SBIR job, I actually, since I've been in the government for a while, recognized that the single most important thing that you can do to understand how to innovate in established program or a new program is read the law and understand exactly what the law says you have to do, what you can't do, and what it's kind of vague on, so that you can understand where you have some absolutes and where you have some flexibilities in the ability to execute. And then the rest of it, a lot of it is history, or just process over time, or how processes like level on to one another. So the reason that I started with that is that when you say, how do you make your investment decisions? We and my Siri on my watch just thought I was talking at it. I was not. When we make these investment decisions, we're actually told by Congress the evaluation criteria we have to use, all of us. And one of them is the technical merit and the innovativeness of the idea itself. So is the idea itself truly innovative? One of them is around the team. Like, is the team qualified to deliver? That doesn't mean that everybody has to have a PhD, for sure. That's not what that means. But does the team demonstrate a competence in the area that they're proposing to do work? And do they have the right team together? Are they missing a key skill set, for example? Third, around the work plan. So they've told us what they want to do. They've told us who's going to do it. Does their work plan seem viable? Like, does it seem like they're going to be able to achieve what they've stated, that they have a handle on what it takes, especially in the aerospace industry, working in a microgravity environment, dealing with space radiation if you're doing things in space. There are some things that don't translate as easily from a terrestrial application to a space application, and just demonstrating some early knowledge of those risks and being able to address those risks. You don't have to have them solved. You can solve them through the project, right? But at least acknowledging a general awareness of the risks. And then finally, fourth is around commercial potential. So we are specifically mandated by law to assess the commercial potential and get more stringent on how we do that as we do higher dollar value investments further down the pipeline. But all of us have to apply those same evaluation criteria. And one of the kind of leveling activities that a federal government process will do is we're transparent about what those are, right? So we tell you, these are the factors that we're going to use. And we even say, this is the percentage that they matter. So what matters the most to us is the technical merit. We say that in the solicitation, it's this percentage of your overall score. And then these other things are these other percentages. We take very seriously that, using our vast kind of technical expertise within NASA to make that technical merit assessment, and to also assess like the viability of the work plan, all of those other things that I mentioned. And then we do some strategic portfolio balancing to see, given that we have 120 areas any year that we want to fund, because what we do that's kind of a little In-Q-Tel-y is we actually specify a need. So the starting point in working with our program is we specify things we call subtopics, but they're need statements. So we know that this customer has this need or this problem. Give us your solutions to address this problem. So our program is not bring us your company. Our program is, here's an area aligned with NASA's overall mission for which we know a problem exists. And we want to engage the intellect of the broader small business and entrepreneurial community. So people have to figure out which of those they're going to actually apply to that aligns with their own business model. but we give them a signal, right? We say, this is something we're interested in as a customer. And if it does align, not only is that additional funding to help them develop that capability, right? They don't have to have it already developed. We fund low technology readiness level stuff. I mean, sometimes the lowest 1, 2, 3 for folks familiar with technology readiness levels at the phase 1 state. So that I hope that's helpful in addressing that.
And I think you're saying that there is technical merit, and then you have maturity 1, 2, and 3. So could you give an indication to answer the question from the audience? What is the lowest level of maturity of technology where below that you wouldn't invest, but at that level you would invest?
So at NASA, we have these. We have this thing called technology readiness level, TRL, and it goes from 1 to 9. And 1 is literally a concept, and okay. 9 is proven flight hardware that, you know, is readily available on the market, that is like, might be 50 years old, but we know it works, and it's flown 1,000 times. So we use that all the time. And the Valley of Death tends to be the stuff from TRL 4 to 6, where it requires testing in a relevant environment and flight testing, like actually starting to get it. And NASA actually offers programs to help companies also get access to flight testing opportunities, which are sometimes the most expensive and the most difficult opportunities to access. So that's some of the stuff that we've also worked with in our program, is creating bridges for our firms to figure out how to get critical access to those flight test type opportunities that can be in many ways some of the biggest barriers to transition to actual repeated customer use, as opposed to like a pilot or just the people that are going to pay for the technology development. But we will fund TRL 1, 2, 3. Typically phase 1s, I'd say, are TRL 1 through 3. And phase 2s can be TRL 2 through 6 if it's software. Sometimes they can blow us out of the park on TRL advancements if it's software, sometimes at those level.
So really from concept onwards, but really very risky technology, or just a concept, and you even have a proof of concept. So I think that's really helpful. So there's one thing you said, which I don't know if all the audience would know what that meant. You said In-Q-Tel-E, which is basically In-Q-Tel, which is a corporate venturing for the CIA, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
And
so
do you partner with them?
So they certainly are a very unique organization within the U.S. and within the federal government space. We have much more of we have an annual amount of money we have to spend. So we run more kind of predictable annual processes in order to make sure that we're getting the greatest value out of those investments, and that we're transitioning. So one of the things that I've done as program executive is I've actually set aside more money for the subsequent investments, right? Let's not just keep investing in phase 1s and phase 2s, but let's set aside 20% of our portfolio, which is what has been set aside now. That may not be exactly what's right, but that's what it is now. It used to be 5%, so we've increased it substantially. The investments that we make on follow-on investments at higher dollar values that are towards specific customer acceleration initiatives.
So I think this is really good to talk about follow, because you clearly have constraints on your phase 1, and a lot of things is defined by law, including ID is defined by law. But when you move to phase 2, do you start to have more latitude about which ones you decide to follow on versus the ones you don't?
Yeah, so we at phase 2, if you get a phase 2 award, actually there's a ton of opportunities that open up for you. We can execute basically an extension to your phase 2 award to keep it going for up to an additional year, but that requires dollar for dollar matching. So that could be that an investor comes in and matches dollar for dollar. Sometimes we see like the corporates come in, but on the corporate R&D side, or even on the corporate corp dev side of things. So I know there's lots of different hats to corporate who is actually doing investing, but we see a decent amount of aerospace primes coming in and matching dollar for dollar on that extension of the phase 2, where they're interested in seeing if that technology could really work as a de-risking to any number of products that they offer. We also see that the same thing happened with the other program that is a long acronym. It's called CCRPP. But that one is, you could have an old phase 2. It could have been like the contract could be expired. It's done. And maybe it took a while for you to find the right product market fit, like, and to figure out who actually the right investor was for you. You can come back to the CCRPP program when your phase 2 is done. And in fact, you could be a phase 2 from any federal agency. It doesn't have to be just us. And come with an investor, a matching investor, and a understanding of who your customer is and how you're going to use this funding to get to that customer. Kind of the last tipping point investment that's needed to de-risk the technology. And we really, really, really prioritize that commercialization plan in those investments. Really don't want that to just be additional research and development funding. We really want that to be like the final de-risking investment, technology de-risking investment, before that investor or whoever picks it up and continues to take it forward. And we've just recently started doing a second phase 2 award that are really those larger dollar value, up to $5 million investments that accelerate the technology development towards a particular NASA customer as a anchor pilot customer for a critical technology, not just for NASA, but enabling the future space economy. So those ones are the ones that we just made 4 announcements of earlier, or just a few weeks ago, actually. That is another opportunity that happens once you've got a phase 2. So getting to phase 2 opens up all sorts of opportunities for additional SBIR investments of a lot. And we try to make it flexible, so it's not, it could be an old award, it could be a current award, it could be another agency's award, so that there's ways for entrepreneurial folks to navigate the system, and not have it be too rules based. But also a really important point that I want to make for you folks that often is underappreciated is that as soon as a small business wins a phase 1, it doesn't even have to be a phase 2, phase 1, they, from the perspective of the government marketplace, the government can buy direct from them for that innovation and any innovation derived from that innovation. That's a huge definition, can buy directly from them without competition forever with no dollar value limit, even if the company is acquired.
That's a huge market access already.
Right.
Yes.
So that for me, when I think about even like more growth state, like companies that are growth oriented companies that already have some investors in place, if you think the government is a market for that, for you in any way, for your firm, going through the SBIR program to get that initial SBIR phase 1 that basically gives you a license for uncompeted awards forever. Now, typically you do have to educate the government customer because they won't believe you. The government customer who's not familiar with SBIR will be like, no, I have to compete everything. Like, no, actually not for SBIR. That's one of the things that the Congress said to small businesses. If you win a phase 1, you have satisfied competition. You've already competed. It's one of the things that they do to kind of reduce the barriers to entry for small businesses who compete against all of these other big players.
That's a huge deal, actually. This is one of the big golden nuggets from this interview, because you are giving a special weapon, sorry for the term, to the startup to be able to be extremely quick to win a government contract in the future.
Yep. Yes. Yeah. It's a different sales tactic because they have to convince, in some ways, they have to convince the government client, no, you can directly buy from me, but they have a vehicle to do that. They don't have to wait for a competition to come out. The government client could still say, I think your solution's good, but I do want to compete against my options. So you're still going to have to compete. But if they have a near-term need and they need it now and you meet their requirement, like they can actually go directly to you.
So let me challenge a little then. If you get this into this program, when you are just at concept level, do you still qualify for the same benefit?
Yeah, but you might have a hard time selling if you don't have a thing, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah,
no, I mean, a few years down the line, they would have a product they are able to sell. They
yes.
can benefit from the fact they were selected in phase 1.
So an example for that, there's this company called NanoRacks that won a single phase 1 award, and it was a long time ago. Man, it could have been like 2000. It was a long time ago. single phase one award, and it was related to building a capability for deploying small spacecraft off of the International Space Station. And it was just a very at that time, I think they were only like $75,000 awards. So it's not like that award was actually used to build the capability, actually finally build the capability to get a deployer up on the International Space Station. But that phase one award was able to be leveraged to get follow-on agreements with the International Space Station customer to actually develop and get that deployer up on the International Space Station. And today, I mean, if you just go do some research on NanoRacks, they actually were a huge part of the small spacecraft kind of renaissance in space before small launch capabilities were available. The only way, in many ways, to get deployed was hitch a ride up to the International Space Station, and then they basically just throw them off the International Space Station through these deployers for you. That's the way they were able to early test some of those small spacecraft capabilities in space. And NanoRacks like squeezed all the juice out of that phase one that they could in order to get their deployer. They've got a commercial service offering on the International Space Station right now.
So I see the audience saying, wow. So I think I'm not the only one to say it. I want to go back to the earlier question, which is about, for corporate VCs, you have a fund, a fixed size fund, and you allocate some of the fund for reserve, which is for follow investments to the companies you invested in the first place. And when I started, I was told, try to plan 40%. And right now, actually, I'm starting to increase it to 50% because of COVID-19. And I feel like I need to be able to help the portfolio companies potentially for longer than initially planned. In your case, you're looking at 20% for this follow. Do you feel like this is enough, or do you feel like if you could increase it, that would be better?
So I am somewhat limited by legal caps. So for example, for the one program I mentioned, the CCRPP program, I can't spend more than 15% of my budget on it. I can't by law. So if I fully utilize that, that would be 15%. And then the Small Business Administration, which is like my overseer, like we have an overseer, it's not just Congress, there's an agency that provides some common practices across the agencies. They've capped our total budget that we can spend on the sequentials at, CCRPP is 10%, the sequentials is 15%. So even if I did both of those completely at full, it'd be 25. And part of the balance when I think about this from a portfolio standpoint or like a fund structure standpoint is that I cannot cannibalize my pipeline. So I have to maintain a healthy enough entry point. I have to have enough good phase ones to translate to phase twos, because really the phase twos is where all that follow-on value for those other investments happen. So if I put too much in my post-phase two investment bucket, I run the risk that I've got not enough high quality projects, especially since we're investing in risky things, to advance. So then I could be like reducing my overall pipeline over time without, I also believe that if you don't put enough funding in phase one, you're going to end up then selecting less risky projects because you need them to work. And so being able to fund a lot at the front end of the pipe increases the appetite for risk, because it's not like everything has to work. You can have some failure. So those are the kinds of things we think about. It's not a perfect science. And frankly, a difficult part of our program is we can say, well, we think 20% is right. We think 25% is right. And then 7 years down the road, we're like, shoot, we cannibalized our whole pipeline. Now we've got quality issues and we've got less mergers and acquisitions than we did 7 years ago. But it's not like you don't have immediate gratification on the policy decisions you make. You have to wait some time to see if those hypotheses test out to be correct. But we do have early indications that investing more than we had been previously on the phase twos that need a little bit additional help to cross that valley of death is having initial payoff, for sure.
Very good. So I have a follow questions, but I will ask a question from the audience. It's a clarification question about when you said it's US companies, what does US company mean? Does it have to be 100% owned in US or 51%? Does it have to have everyone who are citizens, or how do you define this?
Yeah, so that is specifically defined in the by the SBA, and the law specifies what is considered to be an eligible small business and what the ownership of that small business needs to look like. And ownership is where it can get a little complicated, especially when you look at acquisitions where the parent company owns more than just you. That can get complicated on whether or not you become eligible, not just because of size, because there's a size standard, right? The under 500 employees, but also ownership in terms of majority U.S. owned. So those rules can get very. You want to understand it in each unique situation. Is what I'm saying, is that the rules are on our website and they're on SBA's website, but the purpose of the program is to support innovation in American small businesses. And so the rules that are in place are to try to enable that.
Very good. So like VCs and CVCs, you will make a lot of investments, but it takes many, many years, and probably you even many more years before you know if it's a big success or not. How do you track success? What kind of KPIs do you use, which could be useful for other CVCs to listen to, because we have the same constraints of not knowing if you have invested in the right company, startup, to be really a big success. So how do you define success initially?
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways. I think at macro level, in my introductory discussion, I gave you a couple ways that we think about it from an economic impact, like portfolio overall macro. What's the economic impact? That's largely related to the spend, right? It's a fiscal impact that you have in the country by spending money on small businesses and entrepreneurs. That is one undoubtedly impact, but what does that actually mean in terms of like real creation of value or services? And it's also notoriously difficult to track actively or passively revenues and sales from firms that are no longer working with you, because they have no incentive to report those things. So we certainly look to a number of different proxy measures, for example. So what our program is held accountable to reporting up through all the different levels of government to say, how successful are we being? We set a goal for ourselves annually in how many specific technology projects have transitioned to another investment. So that it can be a phase 3 investment that comes from somebody else within the agency. We actually count our CCRPP and our phase 2E awards because it signals an external investor also putting money into a particular, external validation, exactly. And we use some of those kind of proxy measures for uptick, kind of for the demand, the customer demand across the whole portfolio. We haven't gone so far to say that we think the ideal percentage of transitions from the overall portfolio should be 30% in a year to demonstrate we're doing well, because there's also a lot of other economic factors at play, right? Like when you're in a economic recession, our applications go up. Matching funding may or may not be as easy to find. Matching funding could come from other government sources in that situation, or could continue to come from private sources. But there's some of those things around transition are definitely not in our control, right? Like with all of these situations, we lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. You know, it's the same thing that you guys deal with. And so we have indicators of the overall portfolio health and the overall impact, but ours is not financial return, you know, the same way that y'all's would be, or a strategic investment. Ours have more to do with finding technologies that we need as a customer that actually do make a huge mission impact. So there's 6 technologies that were SBIR companies that are on the surface of Mars today on the Mars Curiosity rover. The Mars Curiosity rover would not, it's powered by an entrepreneurial small business. It's battery technology. The whole reason that it works is because of a small business, right? It's powering the whole thing. There's a laser and camera instrument going up on the next lander, Perseverance, which is actually launching on the 30th. So next Thursday, launching early morning. Yeah, that instrument is going to be instrumental in continuing kind of the search for the if there was ever life, right? Like we have an instrument there now that's in the search for water, right? But these small businesses are actually being bought by and used by in these advanced missions doing really important science for NASA. And so that in one hand, we do think about infusions. What are these firms doing for NASA? But we also care a lot about the commercializations and the spin-offs and the technologies, how they've been spun off to other markets. If you guys nerd out to this kind of stuff, there's a great publication that NASA releases every year called Spin-Offs. And it lists all the technology, like for this year, you know, the top 50 spin-off technologies that are making an impact in the broader industry and commercial marketplace. And typically they have absolutely no relevance to a NASA application. It's like the, you know, the Velcro you hear about, or it's those other kind of spin-off applications. And we just have a steady flow of spin-offs. And actually in that spin-off publication every year, I think it's something like 20% of the things that are featured in that book every year come from the SBIR program.
Very nice. So I will ask 500 to add a link to that in the YouTube channel. This is so cool. I want to ask, because you mentioned about university partnership, and I think that's something corporate VCs actually sometimes do, but they should probably do more. And actually the next interview in 2 weeks will be with someone who's coming from this. Stay tuned for when I'm allowed to reveal it. But could you give some tips or best practices about how to engage with universities so actually it's a win-win and not just you take advantage of them or it doesn't pan out?
Yeah. The beauty of the STTR program, the Small Business Technology Transfer Program, is that it requires that collaboration between a university and a small business in the co-development and then commercialization of a technology. And it is a, again, devoted funding source. So what's interesting is the types of things that we see coming out of STTR. They tend to be lower TRL. They tend to be like earlier stage concepts because they're university derived. They're earlier research, but that kind of collaboration between the two has created some really interesting and unique innovations. And one of the sequentials we actually just invested in, a $5 million investment, was in an STTR project with a firm called Protovations. Their partner is MIT, and they're developing traction control systems for lunar rovers, and that's software. So the software that they're developing for traction control is not just applicable to the lunar surface, but that was an STTR that was invested in just recently through phase 1, phase 2, and now a sequential phase 2. And it's really pulling some super innovative research out of university through this company into the market. I will say that there's definitely difficulty in those negotiation of rights agreements. Like that tends to be the things that we tell firms, don't wait on that. Like the negotiation of the intellectual property rights between the firm and the university is something that's going to take some time. And depending on the university, they might have standards. They're like, nope, we get 30%, we will take no less. Or we get, and you're usually negotiating with a different part of the university than the PI that you want to work with. And so they can create really wonderful opportunities to spin out really innovative technologies from the lab to the market. But there is more of a, you need to appreciate and take the time to think about that relationship as a different type of negotiation, because it's not just a person to a person. It's it's your similar, I'd imagine too, when small businesses are negotiating with corporations. You know, it's not just the researcher or the program you want to work with at the company. It's the organization that's going to have some policy too, and it can feel a little lopsided sometimes when you're like the small company and there's this big organization. So some of that's trial and error.
Okay, it's great, and I think we will deep dive in the next interview about what you just said. But you're right, in any negotiation you need to think about the other side. What do they need and why do they do it? Jen, you were fantastic. We're at the top of the hour, but it was really nice, and I think it will help a lot of people to understand this really cool initiative and very meaningful. And yes, thank you. It was really nice.
Thank you to you for a great conversation, and to 500 for hosting this series. We'll look forward to seeing the video.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.